Welcome to the first of 3 seminars hosted by the Open University's Contemporary Cultures of Writing in conjunction with the Institute of English Studies at the School of Advanced Study, University of London. So my name's Joanne Reardon. I'm Senior Lecturer in Creative Writing here at the Open University. During November, we're hosting 3 seminars, of which this is the first, entitled Ekphrasis, Creating a Space for Art and Literature. Ekphrasis in contemporary literature is usually understood as a poetic description of a work of art, but over the course of these 3 seminars, we'll be introduced to different aspects of the practice, which might challenge the way we think about ekphrasis. These seminars will consider the way poets and artists explore ideas around, for example, identity, gender and representation, to reflecting on the way an artist might speak to a poet from the past, and how contemporary poetry responds to abstract works of art. These 3 seminars will bring artists and writers together to explore how each use images and text from ancient and modern sources to create new works which speak to our time. So before I introduce the speakers, I'd just like to give you a few housekeeping notes, if I may. We'll hear both presentations and then there'll be a time for Q&A at the end. However, as there's so many in this seminar, as I said at the beginning, we'll be very grateful if we've muted your microphones as you came in, but if you could keep them muted. And we'd ask you please to use the chat box to ask any questions that occur to you as you go along. We will collate them and then we'll put as many as we have time for to the presenters at the end. We're recording the seminar, but not recording the Q&A. The recording will be available shortly afterwards via the Contemporary Cultures of Writing website, and links to that are in the chat box. I think they're being put in there now, as well as links to the final 2 seminars. For those who require them, you can activate the captions button by clicking on the link on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. You'll see it along the bottom. And it'd be also grateful if you could switch off your videos during the presentation, because it just helps with the whole programme. So over to our speakers for tonight. The first presentation is Medusa and Her Sisters, where poet Natalie Shaw and artist Natalie Sirett discuss their collaboration on Medusa and Her Sisters, a series of sonnets written in response to the Medusa myth. Natalie Sirett is a multimedia artist interested in us, our stories, our icons. As an examination of the negative feminine in our culture, Medusa and Her Sisters reflects a recurring theme in her work. Natalie has exhibited widely in the UK and internationally, most recently at the National Portrait Gallery London and the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford. Natalie Shaw is a poet whose work has been described by the TLS as wonderfully bananas and as highly anarchic by Neil Astley. Oh Be Quiet was published by Against the Grain, and Dirty Martini is out in January 2023 with Broken Sleep. So I will now hand over to them and off we go.
Hi, thank you, Joanne. It's fantastic to be here. And I always apologise that it's confusing that we are both called Natalie and our surnames both begin with the letter S. But I'm Natalie Sirett. I'm the visual artist who made the drawings for the book Medusa and Her Sisters. And this is Natalie Shaw, the poet. And I'm going to kick off. So let me just share the screen because I have some images. So as an artist, my practice has always sat somewhere between word and image. And in fact, in recent times, as you can see from these 2 embroidered pieces here, words actually appear as part of the artwork. These are 2 of 54 handkerchiefs which were embroidered in a series called Killing Kevin. Kevin was a carcinoma that I was having treatment for, and the handkerchiefs came from that. And then I've just got a couple of images here from this more recent series, Manifesto for a New Normal. Why is it doing that? Sorry. Manifesto for a New Normal, and there are tensions at play between, as you can see on here, the words and the stories of the items that they are stitched upon. So for example, I might choose to stitch words on handkerchiefs as they are the ground for that is so much resonant of tears, farewells, love tokens. And then much of this manifesto for the new normal is stitched on babies' clothes, as you can see with the Why Not Go Feral jacket. Many of these, they're antique. I've found them in flea markets and places, but they would have been originally made, the baby jacket, for example, as part of a child's layette, the clothing and things which were made in preparation for that new life of the child. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see this embroidered dress fan, shame disguise, shame disguises. And so here I'm playing around with that sharpness of contrast between the object, which is the fan, and the word, in a fan that might hide, that one might hide behind, that simultaneously shames disguise. So here you have some examples of how word and image combine. But then if we move on to this slide, one of my apparently wordless artworks, they are also often inspired by characters and stories. And as Joe was saying, I have a long-standing interest in the representation of the negative feminine in our culture, leading over the years to work exploring femme fatale that are kind of in the canon of our culture. For example, Charlotte Bronte's first Mrs. Rochester, Pandora, and here we have Eve herself. And this part of my practice is, if you like, a sort of ekphrasis in reverse, in that rather than words being written inspired by image, these images inspired by word and narrative in what's around me. And this drawing, Eve falling, is really, I regard it as an exhortation to all of us to fall, male and female, that we should be disobedient and become knowing. So there's Eve and her serpent. Okay, so this brings us to my dalliance with the Medusa, and this book that we made together. And these are the first. It began with me thinking about the Medusa, her character, and what I understood about her. And these are the first drawings I made. I was reflecting on Medusa's degree of isolation, when just to be looked upon petrifies the other, turns people to stone. And as you can see, my Medusa here is attempting to bridge the gap of her loneliness by holding up a mirror, and she's offering her lover his own reflection to kiss. And that is as good as it's going to get for them. And thinking about the Medusa and thinking about these feminine icons which are ever present in the cultures of little girls growing up, something which I'm quite actively concerned about. And I began to wonder about what people are actively exiling in their appearances right now, in order not to horrify the viewer, and I mean all people in this, male and female. What are we actively exiling? I would suggest that there's almost no such thing nowadays as an acceptable, unedited image of a woman. Apparently, and this is just hearsay, but in Japan, it is considered rude to post an image of oneself online that has not been edited, enhanced, sharpened, you know the drill. Or maybe you don't, and good for you if you don't. So Margaret Atwood says of The Handmaid's Tale's continuing relevance that fertile women are always in a minority in any society. And since fertility is currency to all our cultures and for our futures, it is something that societies need to control. And obviously one can see in The Handmaid's Tale how that happens, but I would suggest that in our society, as opposed to Gilead, that currency of control is actually shame. And shame, you know, the unacceptable, in whichever forms, is a means by which young women in particular are controlled. So moving on, I began to draw and explore and became very fascinated with the Medusa and to read and research about her. And this drawing, Birth of Coral, is inspired by the story of when Perseus puts this, he's killed the Medusa, he's succeeded, you know, he's done the trick with using his shield as a mirror, so she sees herself and he can hack off her head. And he's carrying her head, pops it down on the beach while he goes off to rescue Andromeda, an altogether more attractive maiden, you know, so he's going off doing his heroics. And what happens is that the Medusa's blood flows in rivulets into the sea and petrifies seaweed, thus creating coral. And I think that's an exquisite image, and I thought how extraordinary that everything has its story, and this actually didn't just generate this drawing, but quite a lot of work, because it's such a stunning reverse ekphrasis stimulating piece. Now then, moving on to the Medusa and Her Sisters, and these three here are the heroines of the book Medusa and Her Sisters, which contains sonnets written by 14 contemporary British women poets. I arrived at my interest in the three sisters here through research. I started with, I think, what is more commonly known, that in classical mythology, Medusa was born a great beauty, but she was raped by Poseidon, god of the sea, in the temple of Athena. And it was Athena who cursed Medusa with her serpent curls as punishment for the desecration of her temple. Nice, huh? So, and there's actually a fantastic poem in the book about that, about the way the female goddess cursed the woman who had already suffered and been brutalized. And that's all very dramatic, but what I was more intrigued by personally for my work was the earlier so-called primordial myths, which tell of a Medusa who is born ugly. And she's one of three Gorgon sisters, and they are the offspring of a brother and sister sea monster. Phorcys and Cato are their names. And this Medusa lives in exile with her sisters Euryale and Seno on Cisthene's dreadful plain. That's Aeschylus's description. And again, in many of the images, I'm imagining this dreadful plain, which I thought sounded incredibly cool. I couldn't find any representations of the lesser known Gorgons, Euryale and Seno, and it was absolutely wonderful to begin creating their look, their traits. I endowed Seno, who's on the right here, with coral hair sprouting from her scalp. Her father is recorded as having a coral beard, and she also has a fish tail, and like her mother. And then Euryale, on the left, to the left of the Medusa, has a crab claw for one of her arms. So let's move on again. You can see Euryale in the foreground here, and then Seno, and Medusa's having a swim in the background there. This is the Gorgons at the beach, and it was at the point when this series of drawings was largely formed that I began to talk to the poet and my friend Natalie Shaw about making a book where other women poets could share their own Medusas and their sisters. I wasn't requiring them to be intrigued by what intrigued me, but I just wondered if something could happen there. I feel we probably all have our own personal Medusa and her sisters. And I am going to hand over to Natalie, young Nat, we'll call her, soon, just to talk about how she created the book, its structure, and worked with the poets on their sonnets. I couldn't have imagined that such extraordinary poetry would be written. So for me, this book and this collaboration was and remains a very precious thing. And I'd like to add as well that as I picked up the book to look at it in preparation for this seminar, 3 years on from publication, I understand that it is a work of rehabilitation of the negative feminine, something that is much needed, a reconsideration of what is monstrous. And also something that's very much was then and is still in the zeitgeist. So as we have historians and novelists and filmmakers, journalists, finding and tracing hidden lives of women and putting them in their place in history. But what I'm going to do now is hand over to you, young Nat, and move on to your slide.
It's great to be young, Nat. Hooray.
You stick with it, love.
Absolutely. So yes, I am the other Nat involved in this project, and I was incredibly excited when old Nat is not good, but when art Nat spoke to me about creating something together. And you can see here a picture of a book I've had since I was about 10 or 11. Which is actually just a little bit longer than I've known Nat. And I used to read this almost every night when I couldn't get to sleep and follow the characters from definition to definition, because it's alphabetical sort of characters from Greek mythology. And Medusa's story, as well as lots of other of these mythical creatures and heroes and heroines, has been part of my life for decades, really. And I was just really excited about the idea of Natalie reclaiming and retelling a story and asking poets to respond to this interpretation. This is a sonnet by someone called Sir Philip Sidney from a sequence called Astrophil and Stella. I'm not going to read it, but he's describing Stella's face, and Stella has not just been put on a pedestal, she's actually made of stone. So she's described as being made of alabaster, marble, and porphyry. And as I thought about Medusa's story in Nat's work, I was thinking about these outcast women and their monstrousness, the impossibility of approaching them, and how Medusa's gaze turned people to stone, how she was literally petrifying. And I thought about sonnets, places where women have often been placed and left frozen, some for many hundreds of years now. Women and other objects of desire. And I wondered if Medusa and her sisters could do some reclamation from these spaces as well as from Nat's art. This is Shakespeare's sonnet 18, I think. And when I think of sonnets, I think of working with constraint. So looking at this text, it looks like a box on the page, and the idea of constraint became really powerful to me in this context. I'm fascinated, like stanza is Italian for room, and a sonnet is literally a 14-line room. It fits on a page. It's not an architectural structure, but it feels like one in my head. And Ian Patterson describes Shakespeare's sonnets as panic rooms. And so I wondered if this space could become a place of reflection, where Medusa could look out from and actually be seen instead of causing this petrifying response. And what I wanted to do was provide a space where poets could take the constraint and turn it into an act of liberation or freedom, which is what I felt Nat was doing with her images. And it's also what I think the act of creating a poem is. It's an act of freedom. I wanted to see what would happen if we made Medusa and her sisters the ones who owned the spaces in these rooms. What would they do? How would they behave? Would the poets try and contain them, or would they escape somehow? And so what we did was invite 14 women to respond to a drawing from that series with a sonnet, so with this constraint. And there were lots of questions, lots of what rules were necessary, what did they have to do, did it rhyme, did it not rhyme? And so I wanted people to to do what felt right for them, and pointed them in different directions to different people's interpretation of sonnets. So that's how we started this project, and what came back was properly magical. There were so many different voices, and each one was completely unexpected, and it was completely unfamiliar, but it was somehow exactly the right voice telling the right story. Arabella Curry's sonnet, which I think Nat's going to read in a minute, is called Birth of Coral, and ends, "These ocean flowers won't survive unless they're armored and have teeth and bones." And I think the women in these poems feel incredibly real to me. They have bodies and bones, and they tell their own stories in their own voices. We're going to read 3 of them to you now, and you can judge for yourselves.
Okay, so I'm going to stop. Okay, I'm going to read the poem Birth of Coral that Nat Shaw just mentioned. This, in the book at least, I don't know if you can see, goes alongside this, another version of the coral being made. But anyway, it's by the poet Arabella Curry. And I love it because the imagery in this is so vivid. I feel like I'm watching a movie. So anyway, the coral is being created by the Medusa's blood. Birth of Coral. Loath to scratch Medusa's head upon the sand, he piles kelp and sea wrack. But bodiless, I can still scratch back. Watch his bloodied hands paddle in the shallows. Big mobile on his belt, jeans rolled, heat haze over flat level sands. One ear to the beach, I hear sandworms, turtles' eggs, the smack of naked feet, him calling to Andromeda. I can't speak, but what I'd say. The tide is rising, and over there, I see a white landslide begin. While my blood jams in his quicks, he won't listen. But I'd say these ocean flowers won't survive unless they're armored and have teeth and bones.
I was going to read Sarah Watkinson's poem called To the Cistern Medusa, and it accompanies this image of Nat's. To the Cistern Medusa. It's tough being 12. In the cool dark by the tank, I wait for the music of drips to drown my slowing pulse, and my eyes recover from the city's glare, aware again of your underwater presence. Oh, Medusa, turn your Gorgon's gaze on the men who've chased me home from the marketplace. Coral builder, goddess of the to and fro of sea and stone, mineralize them. Mortal sister, metamorphosed nymph, weren't you also shocked once to turn pelagic, sexual, to find one glance aroused a swarm of boys and deadly jealousy? If I'd your snake-locked head on my girl's body, I'd beam your basilisk eyes on all of them and leave them fossilized. That's Sarah Watkinson, and I'll hand you over to Jo now to read the final poem.
Thanks, Nat. I was involved in this project. We didn't say that earlier on, did we? So the picture I had was, I don't know whether you can see it, was this one, the stone men. Minerva looks away. You watch him place her head down sadly, slow, on velvet pillows cut from sea-racked flowers. Her blood strikes coral, sings the chime of bone. His gesture shows this god has mortal powers, the one man living in this sea of stone. Jagged men who rage, stare and stand now, stunned by serpent anger etched across each face, tied by time, decayed, rooted in this place. Was there a moment when you could have tried to stop him take what he had come to find, not cowered mirror-bound behind your lies? They punished her because you chose to hide. They do what they do because they can. You should know this more than anyone. Okay, so I'll say thank you as well to both of you for that wonderful presentation. And I will now unspotlight you, and I will now introduce Jane. And that was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. So if anyone's got any questions, please put them in the chat box so we can come to them at the end. So our second presentation tonight, and Jane, I let Jane try and upload her presentation while I'm doing this, is Ekphrasis of TV, Film and Musical Performances, where my colleague and poet Jane Yeh will discuss her ekphrastic poetry, which is inspired by visual art as well as TV programs, films and musical performances. Jane Yeh's 29 collection, Discipline, was a Poetry Book Society recommendation. She was named a Next Generation Poet by the Society for her 2012 collection, The Ninjas, and her first collection, Marabou, in 2005 was shortlisted for the Forward, Whitbread and Oldborough Poetry Prizes, her works published by Carcanet. A lecturer in creative writing at the Open University, she was a mentor for the 2021 Ledbury Poetry Critics Programme. I'll just now hand over to you, Jane, and spot.
Okay, so I will just open this presentation. Okay, so and rearrange my screen on in my view. Okay, thank you all. I'm just going to read a few poems and kind of discuss a little bit of the background of them. So I've actually written a lot of poems, more than this, about that are kind of more traditional ekphrasis, you know, inspired by like paintings or drawings or other kinds of sort of traditional, like, you know, serious artworks, if you want to say. But I'm kind of more interested nowadays in kind of trying to do ekphrasis of things that are sort of more pop culture, I guess you could say. So for instance, like television shows. I guess television has always been a really big influence on me and my imagination in a lot of ways. So I have a bunch of poems, I'm only going to read 2 of them today, that are based on like these kind of cheesy or wacky TV shows from the 80s, American TV shows that I grew up watching. I'm from the US originally. So the first one is like inspired by The Equalizer, which I just put a little background up on here. If you haven't seen this show, I guess a lot of people probably haven't seen this original show from the 80s, but you know, there's like a new modern reboot of it that stars Queen Latifah, which is actually really good fun. It shows on like Sky or Now in the UK. And then, you know, there have also been these recent reboot movies starring Denzel Washington films that you can see in the cinema. So this poem is just called The Equalizer. Mickey grabs the duffel bag, revs up the van. Dramatic synth music everywhere, stabby chords. Being chased down an escalator, waving a gun. Light flashing off a revolving door, jangling notes. Yuppies in the bistro braying about stocks. The city gray as a towel, boxy rectangular cars. An alley, a coffee shop, a garage, and a bar. Who loves you? It's hard work saving suckers from their own dumb lives. Category is urban extravaganza. 1 hour in neon, hot dogs and ammo. Night falls like a key change on the asymmetric park. Time to return to your carpeted apartment for the news at 10 and jazz on the piano. The dark like a blanket covering everything up. One thing that's kind of funny about this poem, I guess, sorry, I'm just counting quickly, 2, 4, 6. Yeah, so when I've been writing these poems about TV shows for several years now, but most of them I haven't published, like none of them are in my actual books of poetry. And so for a while I was trying to make them all sonnets because I thought it would be kind of funny to use like, you know, this very traditional, kind of like high literature art form, the sonnet, and be writing about these silly TV shows. So this is one of them. I mean, the sonnet, obviously, and this kind of contemporary poetry sense where you don't really follow the rhyme and meter most of the time. Okay, so the next poem is about Murder, She Wrote, which I think most people know, and is still shown constantly in reruns here and in the US. Rest in peace, Angela Lansbury, obviously. Murder, She Wrote. Jessica types secretarially fast. She walks to the mailbox like a boss. The langoustine of the morning is occupied by her preparations. She makes a killer tuna salad for the 4th of July picnic. Also, her knowledge is vast as a flatbread, knowledge of murder. Jessica walks down to Main Street like a pelican. Her hair is like a certain Asian foodstuff, pork floss. The picnic is in full swing. If someone were to be killed, Jessica would never be suspected. The catamaran of sunset thuddingly docks. Jessica quizzes the mayor perkily about fireworks. She uses her powers of logic like a crab pinching its neighbors. Ouch. Surprisingly, no one is murdered during the fireworks, technically speaking. Jessica wakes up the next day like a creamy soup base. She types and types, but she can't remember what happened yesterday. Also, the police are coming. Jessica's voice is wobbly as an egg for no reason. Her thoughts are like kidnapped victims being kept in a cellar, the converted basement of her mind. So the next poem is kind of a ekphrasis of, in a way, a TV show and also of a musical performance. So I had read various articles about this like kind of famous performance of David Bowie in 1979 on Saturday Night Live, which is this long-running American TV show. And you can watch the clips of it on YouTube really easily, which is exciting. So, but basically my kind of angle of interest, I'm not really a David Bowie fan, but there are these two kind of performance artists, cabaret performers, singers who were and are based in New York. Klaus Nomi, who sadly died in 1983 of complications from AIDS, and Joey Arias, who's still alive and still performs. They were part of like this kind of New York, performance art club scene. So when David Bowie arrived in New York to do this performance, he met them at a club and then asked them to come perform with him on Saturday Night Live. So this is just a still from it. The person on the right dressed in black is Klaus Nomi, and the other one in red is Joey Arias. So I just threw up some background information to give a little flavor of how Klaus Nomi was like this very kind of eccentric or outlandish figure. I guess that this story of this and this performance kind of inspired me to write the next poem, which is also one of these kind of like contemporary sonnets or loose sonnets, I guess you could say. Self-portrait as Klaus Nomi in New York. My mechanics are almost entirely self-taught. My super scream capabilities, my mythological silence. On television, I look very smart. Night falls like a slab of bacon. Every night is a performance the diameter of a wire. In the mouth of a dog, the mouth of a god. Every performance is a boulder to look behind. On the plastic grass, we hold a secretive ball. The ice cubes are enormous and come in different colors. If I had my own planet, it would be painted white. I'm modernist like that. My signature scent is L'air du Prawn. In my Freudian polo neck, I watched a program about regret. This line is for a thought about film cinematography. Every day is like a horse I don't want to ride. Corduroy, corduroy, corduroy. If you pull the right string, the curtain will fall. In an imaginary cab, you might pull the right string. Every line is a performance that won't stay up. My kingdom for a joke. So the next poem is kind of an example of what I mean about kind of ekphrasis of films. So I have some other poems that haven't been published yet that are inspired by films, but this one was inspired by the film Inland Empire by David Lynch, and it was part of a project that another poet, Rachel Long, put together and commissioned poets to write. So she had us all write about whatever we wanted to, as long as it was inspired in some way by this film, Inland Empire. So even by David Lynch standards, I would say this film is very strange and kind of nothing makes sense, and you have no idea what's going on for almost the whole time. And it has kind of different strange strands. So like, you know, some of it is more realistic or followable in its narrative than others. And one of the kind of peculiar things is that like these normal scenes of, you know, live action actors in LA doing stuff as characters, it'll be intercut with these like stop motion animation scenes, which these are two stills from, that are sort of like these, it looks like people, but they're wearing rabbit heads, and then they're filmed in sort of what you could say is maybe like the set of a sitcom, but like it doesn't make sense, and they don't talk in English, and there's like weird sound effects playing over when you see these scenes of them. So that was what immediately grabbed me about the film that I decided to write about. So the poem's just called Rabbit Empire. In the empire of the rabbits, the long-eyed girl is king. The afterlife is like a movie, edited and full of plot holes. On a leatherette settee, we twitch our ears coquettishly. We think she loves us. Green walls will with a green dress chime. The angora of our hearts softly blows whenever she draws near. The door to the past only opens one way, into a hotel room. You can't turn it off like TV. It's switched to nibble on a cream cracker while she goes about in heels like a bachelorette on speed. At the picnic, the grass is so green we could cry. The language of the dead sounds like static or a weird encyclopedia. When the phone rings, it's for her. Our eyes light up in the dark. She wakes up in Kansas, trailing memories like babies. Roses fall through the air like a sweet shop exploding. So this poem, Bel Canto, I guess it wasn't inspired by a particular opera or opera performance, but just kind of the general idea, I guess, of opera, and also of this genre of opera called bel canto that is kind of like my favorite in terms of traditional or canonical operas. So, you know, it's from the earlier part of the 19th century. So it's like Donizetti, Rossini, Bellini are the main composers of that. Yeah, so bel canto. The opera in her head runs with no interval. A lot of people singing tunelessly about the same things. An overheard comment like a rotting peach. The overzealous cockatoo of her impatience, flap, flap. The slab of blue behind her is a sea of her doubts. The squirrel in her stomach trying to get out. They say you have to be twice as good. They say there are pills for everything now. Enamel eyes to see all the better with, my dear. Fur coat for your tongue. And the last poem is, so this is kind of an example, I guess, of a poem that is inspired by a musical performance. So the title of the poem is taken from this song by a band called Sleater-Kinney, but the poem is actually about kind of like the performance of this old, much older band from America called Throwing Muses that were like my favorite band in high school. So those are just some pictures of them on the side. But basically, I guess I'm kind of interested in this idea of sort of, in terms of ekphrasis of musical performances or music, you know, like what is it to try to sort of capture the idea of sounds like music, but in words on a page, you know, like it's, I don't know, it's kind of something that I want to explore further, maybe. So anyway, turn it on. Spill of sequins down the front. Follow spot, colored French peacock. The song spills from her open mouth. Don't you worry, honey. Left hand on the strings. Her voice is a holler made of fury and beer. Her lungs are a calamity. Can't stand the thought. Chit-chat and sassafras. Light, then dark. Flip a switch. Noise like a tidal wave swallowing her up. Noise like a wall. Hard heart pulling out all the stops till it doesn't hurt anymore. Don't say the word. A chain of notes in the dark. Won't she or will? The kick and stutter of her voice as the next song starts. Her arm all guitar, sparkle and dirt. Sorry, if you heard some scratching noises, that's my cat on the floor scratching at it for no reason. Okay, so thank you. That's it for me.